For the last 10 years of my life, I was a ghost. No, not in the mystical sense. I was an artist forger, and my job was to erase myself, my personality, my style, and become someone else, a long-dead genius. I could reproduce the cracks of a Dutch still life so that they spoke of 300 years of drought and humidity. I could forge a Monet signature, and experts, looking through a magnifying glass, would swear they saw a reflection of the pond at Giverny in the brushstroke. I lived in the shadows, but I lived luxuriously. My apartment in Geneva was a work of minimalist art, a one-woman gallery where not a single fake was to be found. I was the best in my field because I didn't believe in what others believed. I didn't believe in authenticity. For me, it was just a word invented by auction houses to drive up prices. I believed in beauty. If my copy was as beautiful as the original, if it evoked the same feelings, then what was the difference? I didn't consider myself a deceiver, but rather a conduit. I gave people without the emir's fortune a chance to touch the sublime. At least, that's how I reassured myself. And I didn't believe in karma. Karma is a fairy tale for those who fear living without rules. A cosmic policeman making sure you help old ladies cross the street. My philosophy was simpler. The world is chaos. There is no justice or retribution. There is only will, intelligence, and luck. And I had all three. I was smart, cautious, and incredibly lucky. I created illusions and sold them for real money. I was convinced that I stood outside the system, outside any laws except the chemical composition of pigments and the physics of canvas aging. I was certain that the echo of my actions would never catch up with me. Everything changed when I received a commission for a painting known as the Weeping Saint. A painting believed to be cursed. A painting that was said to choose its owner and reflect their soul, becoming either a mirror of their virtue or a magnifying glass of their vice. I scoffed at these legends. To me, it was just another canvas, another work. I didn't know that this time I would be forging more than just a painting. I would be forging a mirror for my own soul. He found me through a chain of 5 intermediaries, each convinced they were working for the other. His name was Alistair Finch. A billionaire, a recluse, a collector with a reputation for being a predator. He didn't just buy art, he bought stories, preferably with a dark undertone. Our meeting took place in his penthouse overlooking Lake Geneva. The air was sterile, like an operating room, and Finch himself resembled a surgeon, cold, precise, with eyes that seemed to see right through you. "I want the Weeping Saint," he said without preamble, pointing to a blank wall, illuminated as if a masterpiece had already hung there. The original was lost in a fire 200 years ago. Only sketches and one detailed description remain. I want you to resurrect it. The Weeping Saint. Even I, a cynic, knew that legend. The painting was painted in the 17th century by a hermit monk, Brother Matthias, considered either a saint or a madman. He painted it in his cell, using homemade paints, said to be mixed with his own blood and tears. The painting depicted the saint's face with a single tear rolling down his cheek. But witnesses describing the painting swore the tear looked real, liquid, as if it were about to fall from the canvas. And the strangest thing was its reflection in the saint's eyes. Everyone saw something different in it. The righteous saw angels, the sinners, demons. Legends are a good marketing ploy, I said, trying to keep my voice even. It will drive up the price. I don't care about the price, Finch snapped. I care about the result. I want it to be indistinguishable. for it to carry the same power. I barely restrained myself from laughing. Power. He spoke of the painting as if it were a nuclear reactor. I can reproduce the technique, the pigment composition, the aging of the canvas. I cannot reproduce the power, Mr. Finch. I am no alchemist. You are the best forger in the world. His eyes glittered. To me, you are an alchemist. Work your magic. The fee will not disappoint. He named a sum that would provide a comfortable retirement for a small European country. A sum after which I could retire and never pick up a brush again. I agreed. The work began. It was unlike anything I'd done before. Usually, I worked from originals, or at least high-quality reproductions. Here, I had nothing. Only a few pencil sketches of the saint's face, made by Brother Matthias's student. And a single description left by an inquisitor who visited the monk's cell shortly before his death. The description was detailed, almost poetic. St. Jerome's face is turned toward the viewer, but his gaze is directed inward, into the abyss of his own soul. His skin is pale as parchment, his wrinkles like rivers on a map of suffering. But there is no despair in him, only an infinite, sorrowful wisdom. And a tear. One tear, like a drop of liquid pearl, froze halfway down his cheek. And in that tear, and in the pupils of his eyes, it's not the earthly world that's reflected, but the heavenly or the hellish, depending on who's looking. I set up a separate studio in my apartment, completely isolated from the outside world. I started with canvas. I found some antique 17th-century linen in France, the same kind Brother Matthias might have used. I made my own glue from rabbit skins to prime it. I spent weeks studying the chemistry of pigments from that era, hand-grinding lapis lazuli for ultramarine and cinnabar for red. My work had always been meditative, but this time there was something else. The isolation of my studio began to feel less like a professional necessity and more like a monastic cell. The world outside, with its noise and bustle, began to seem alien, distant. To recreate Brother Matthias's style, I had to become him. I read everything I could find about his life, about asceticism, about long fasts, about rumors of his visions. I began to eat as meagerly as he did and sleep on a hard mattress. I wanted to feel him physically, to understand what moved his hand. And gradually, strange things began to happen to me. I dreamed of fragments of someone else's life. The cold stone floor beneath my bare feet, the smell of incense, the monotonous singing of psalms. I woke up feeling like I had the weight of someone else's sins on my shoulders. I attributed this to overwork and being too deeply immersed in the material. I began working on the face. Days and nights merged into one endless painting session. I applied paint in thin, glazing layers, like the old masters. The face on the canvas slowly emerged from the gloom. But it was dead. Technically flawless, but dead. The eyes lacked that abyss of soul the Inquisitor had written about. They were empty, like glass marbles. Finch called every day, his voice growing increasingly impatient. I was on the brink of despair. The painting defied me. It mocked my skill, my technique. One night, in a fit of rage, I threw my palette on the floor. The knife I was using to clean the paints bounced off and slashed my hand. I watched my blood drip onto the floor. And then a wild, irrational thought struck me. A legend. Blood and tears. With a trembling hand, I brought my cut finger to the palette and mixed a drop of my blood with cinnabar. I applied this hue to the saint's lips. And in that instant, his face was transformed. A shadow of suffering appeared on his lips, and in his eyes. Something moved in his eyes. They were no longer empty. They were looking at me. And in their depths, I saw something that sent a chill down my spine. I saw a dim, distorted reflection of my own face. I was terrified, but also intrigued. I was on the verge of creating my greatest masterpiece. There was just one last detail left. A tear. I tried every technique I knew. I used resins, varnishes, and oil mixtures to create a wet gloss effect. But the tear came out flat, painted on, fake. It was dead. Another week passed. I didn't leave the studio. I barely slept or ate. I talked to the portrait, begging it to open up to me. It remained silent, and only its eyes seemed to grow sadder. I was completely exhausted, physically and mentally. One such sleepless night, sitting before the painting, I suddenly felt the futility of my life. A life spent copying other people's masterpieces, creating beautiful illusions that held nothing behind them. I, the great Eliana, creator of beauty, was completely alone. No friends, no love, only money and the fear of exposure. And from this all-consuming feeling of loneliness and self-pity, tears gushed from my eyes. One of them fell onto the canvas, right on the saint's cheek. And a miracle happened. My tear didn't soak into the paint. It froze on the surface, preserving its perfect shape, its wet sheen. It became part of the painting. Image of the painting with a tear, it became that very drop of liquid pearl the Inquisitor wrote about. The painting was finished. And it was alive. Finch was ecstatic. He stared at the painting, mesmerized. "What do you see?" I asked in a whisper. "I see justice," he replied, his face twisted into a strange, predatory smile. He paid me and took the painting. I returned to my apartment, feeling drained, as if not only my strength but also part of my soul had been drained from me. I decided I would leave immediately. I would lay low for a year, too. I would forget all of this. But karma, which I didn't believe in, found me that same evening. I walked into my living room and froze. On the wall where my main trophy hung, the small, original Degas watercolor I'd bought with my first big payday, there hung a copy. A perfect, flawless copy. My own, which I'd made for practice many years ago and kept in a folder. The original was gone. I rushed to the safe. My father's gold watch, the only memento of him, was replaced by a cheap, gilded fake. My collection of rare books, all modern reprints in identical covers. Everything genuine, everything authentic in my life began to disappear, replaced by my own perfect counterfeits. It was a sophisticated, personal hell. The world was paying me in my own coin. I realized the painting was the work of this. The curse was real. It was a mirror, reflecting not only the soul but also one's actions. I, who had filled the world with copies, was now condemned to live in a world of copies. I tried to fight it. I decided to sell the remaining forgeries to raise money and disappear. But my underground contacts stopped answering my calls. My buyers pretended not to know me. My reputation, my identity as the world's best forger, was erased. The painting was taking more than just my belongings. It was taking my history, my strength. In desperation, I began searching for information about Brother Matthias and his works. I spent weeks in libraries, rummaging through old church archives. And I found it. He had created not one, but several such paintings. He gave them to people mired in sin, to give him a chance at redemption. The painting wasn't a curse. It was a cure. Bitter, but a cure nonetheless. She forced people to face the consequences of their choices and balance their karmic scales. I knew I had to get the painting back. Destroy it. It was the only way to break this cycle. I knew Finch would never give it up willingly. This was the last, most difficult job of my career. Not to create a forgery, but to steal it. I spent a month preparing. Finch's penthouse was an impenetrable fortress. But I knew how collectors thought. I knew their weaknesses, their obsession with security. I used all my skills to plan the heist. That night, during a thunderstorm that disabled some of the security systems, I infiltrated the penthouse. I passed the laser beams, hacked the electronic locks. I was a ghost in a strange temple. I found the painting. It hung on that very wall and seemed to glow from within. I walked closer and looked into the saint's eyes. This time, it wasn't myself I saw in the reflection. I saw a procession of faces, the museum curators, collectors, and experts I'd deceived. I saw the entire chain of my deception, stretching back 10 years. And for the first time, I felt not the triumph of my mastery, but a suffocating shame. She's beautiful, isn't she? I turned around. Finch stood in the doorway. He wasn't surprised. I've been waiting for you, Eliana. He told me why he wanted this painting so much. His entire life had been blighted by one injustice. His father had been ruined and driven to suicide by his partner with a forged promissory note. Finch had dedicated his life to revenge. He had found that man and destroyed him, his family, his name. But revenge brought no relief, only emptiness. I thought the painting would show me his suffering in hell, he said furiously. I wanted to watch his torment forever. But I look into those eyes. And see only my reflection. The reflection of a man who spent his life hating and was left with nothing. The painting was working. It was showing him his own karma. His revenge had devastated him. At that moment, the fire alarm in the building went off. But that wasn't part of my plan. It was Finch's security system, which he himself had activated to catch me. His obsession with security backfired. Due to a system failure, the firewalls blocked all exits, and the fire suppression system failed. Acrid smoke from a short circuit in the wall quickly began to fill the room. Finch stood paralyzed, staring at the painting, a prisoner of his own reflection. I had a choice: save myself or try to save him and the painting. The painting that had ruined my life, but also made me see the light. I realized there was no need to save it. It had to be destroyed. To free both myself and him. I grabbed the heavy bronze statue from the fireplace and threw it with all my might at the canvas. The 17th century fabric split with a crack. But it wasn't smoke or flame that poured from the gap. A pure, white light poured out, and a sound like a single, perfectly played organ chord echoed through the room. And in that instant, the smoke cleared, and the fire behind the wall went out. A year has passed. I live in a small coastal town in Portugal. My money, my apartment, my name, all gone. The things, replaced by fakes, remained fakes. I sold them for next to nothing. I rent a tiny studio with an ocean view. I paint simple landscapes, portraits of local fishermen. I sign them with my real name. These paintings don't bring in much money, but they bring me peace. For the first time in my life, I feel not like a ghost, but like a true artist. I no longer believe the world is chaos. I don't know if karma exists. But I do know that every action has an echo. And sooner or later, it returns. One day, a package arrives in the mail with no return address. Inside is a small, old, but authentic pencil sketch by an unknown Florentine master. Attached is a note with just 2 words, "For a new beginning." I know it's from Finch. I hang this sketch on the wall of my studio. It's the only painting in my house besides my own. I look at it, then at my clean, primed canvas. And for the first time in years, I feel completely authentic.